a statement, but of course we're not applying that so-called reason to the balance of Auckland. And I really require some further explanation of how you are lending support, the staff are lending support to the IHP's recommendations when their statement is just allow those places to grow organically. If you allow that to grow organically, why not just allow all of Auckland to grow organically? I'm struggling to support the B on the very narrow and skeletal reasoning.
Okay, so in terms of the current situation, none of those rural or coastal villages within the legacy plans have a metropolitan urban limit around them or a RUB. Yep. The way that they've grown in the past is through plan change processes or non-complying activity processes. Though both of those methods are appropriate methods for the future, we believe that the fact that in the recommended version of the plan, the panel has said, as well as doing those, there will be a requirement that they have to do a structure planning as part of that. Structure planning, in terms of what we recommended in our case, has been beefed up in the recommended version by the panel, yep. And it does address the things that we would think are really important, which is about can they service themselves with infrastructure? Are they they have to avoid elite soils, they have to avoid cultural areas. All of the things that we would consider need to happen in these coastal and rural villages if they wanted to expand have been covered in that process. So on balance, we believe that many of these areas aren't areas that do more than just expand at a fairly slow rate. Yep. We think there's the opportunity here to see how these provisions work and monitor them in the future. And I don't want to commit the council to work in the future, but if there was a concern, then that's a requirement of the planning department to look at a village plan for each of those areas and talk about how they might grow with those individual communities, which is probably a much better way of doing it than putting an arbitrary rub around it now.
So thank you, Ms. Pruitt. Your explanation expands significantly on the reasons that aren't evident in the reasoning of the IHP. So you are confirming that enabled growth is subject to certain criteria, structure planning, etc. How can we beef that capital B up then? Is because as it is at the moment, it's not clear that there are other layers to be addressed, because it worries me the way the IHP have been a lot briefer than you have been in your explanation of the other criteria.
You could add the wording
So John will just work with the team about putting some additional words to B, and when we come back to vote on them, you can see what those words are.
Thank you. And my second question, this may be addressed elsewhere, but there is confusion about the application of the RUB on Waiheke Island. Is this a place to address that?
So in terms of that issue, yes, it is addressed in this section. It was addressed in A, where we made the comment that, so in the report on page 41, we make the comment that because currently, as everybody is aware, Waiheke Island, the only rules in the unitary plan that apply to the Hauraki Gulf Islands, as they were defined in the old Auckland City area, so I'm not talking about Cowell or the islands that were part of Rodney, yep. But the old Hauraki Gulf Islands of Waiheke, Great Barrier and the surrounding conservation islands, the only parts of the unitary plan that apply to it are the regional policy statement. And the reason for that was when we started developing the unitary plan, there was a concern expressed by staff, by councillors and the local board at that time that the Hauraki Gulf Islands had just been through a district plan review. In fact, we hadn't even resolved the appeals. So we pulled that was excluded from the unitary plan. In doing that, because the panel has now removed the rural-urban boundary from the regional policy statement, technically that removes a rural-urban boundary from Waiheke. Now, the wording of the report by the panel is not at all clear, because it says it removes the RPS from it removes the rural-urban boundary from the regional policy statement, and then says, and no change in Waiheke, but there will be no RPS provisions to make that an effective or viable rule. So in our interpretation of it, it is that the rural-urban boundary has been removed from Waiheke, but those of you who know the Waiheke, the Hauraki Gulf Island section of the district plan, will know that the plan is very clear about discrete villages on Waiheke with, I think it's land unit, and please don't quote me, land unit 20 in between, which is actually designed to prevent the spread of villages, and there is a clear distinction between the land units on the eastern side of Waiheke, which are for rural activity, and on the west, which is where the boundary was. So in the intervening time between when the planning team get to work with the local board on bringing the district plan provisions of the Hauraki Gulf Islands into the unitary plan, we do not believe the fact that there is no rub there is an issue. But we can't have a line on a map that has no rules in the unitary plan. It's meaningless.
Thank you. Right, hang on. Right, Councillor Linda.
Thank you. I mean, clearly there's, this isn't quite a change, and there is some quite concern in particularly the Rangers community around, and coastal community around these. And I've had a briefing on this, and I've had explained to me that there'll still be significant hurdles to any changes. So can I just ask again, with the Waitakere Ranges Heritage Area Act, that will be an overlay in this, if this is adopted? There'll be objectives, the 20 objectives still to be met?
Yeah. So the panel has recommended a structural change that would replace the precinct for the Waitakere Ranges Heritage Area with an overlay that essentially the same or very similar objectives and policies. So any proposal to move the RUB into the Waitakere Ranges Heritage Area would be subject to an assessment against those objectives and policies. But specifically in terms of the RUB and the way the panel has recommended it appears or is described in the regional policy statement, there is reference to, and we can pull up the specific wording if you like, but it's specific reference to the Waitakere Ranges Heritage Area Act, and avoiding being contrary to or inconsistent with the intent of that act. So any private plan change to move the RUB would still have some policies in there that specifically refer to the Rangers Act.
Okay, and so in terms of, has there been any consideration by the planners when you've been assessing this, that this might be a breach of that act by the panel recommending a move from prohibited to non-complying?
The underlying act will be superior. It's got a...
Well, we're covering that off under, I think,
There's a specific
the
area.
specific
We'll do that
Waitakere
later?
Ranges
There's a
rules.
Waitakere Ranges
So I guess
rules.
I just want to be reassured that in terms of this resolution, if it's adopted, is that it will not allow for open slather, that it will be very difficult and very rare to actually get any movement at all.
So in terms of all rural and coastal towns, any expansion beyond the current zoning, urban zoning that's applied to them, would require either a plan change, and that could either be a private plan change or a plan change promoted by council if they recognise with the community a need for more area, or through a non-complying resource consent. In both cases, as it's noted in B, that's just been put up. We believe there are robust enough objectives, policies and methods for a good consideration on a case-by-case basis.
I'm
Is
very
that a-
comfortable
is
we've
that a bit-
added that in. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, councillor Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Mr Mayor, I'll be voting against this, and we have just pushed back on the panel's recommendation to disintegrate land use and transport, which is not wise use, but their recommendations in regard to the RUB are even more damaging. And they are the antithesis of sustainable management. I guess this has been really, as we are a unitary council, in some ways moving the methods from the RPS section to the district plan section is in some ways academic, but for the fact that any developer now can come along and change the regional urban-rural boundary by initiating a plan change. What it will mean is that the old bugbear of Auckland, of development exceeding infrastructure, will be even more exacerbated. I think the officers and the council and all of us in this room were quite correct when we proposed the original notified unitary plan, and that locating the rural-urban boundary at the regional policy statement level provided the certainty necessary to enable the effective and efficient management of growth, particularly in relation to programming and funding infrastructure. That will now be moving into a far more chaotic, anarchic era when it comes to growth and development and infrastructure. Abolishing the RUB around coastal villages, coastal settlements, will also mean subdivisions exceeding for instance, the sewerage, reticulated sewerage capacity. We've seen examples of this in the past. This will be a whole lot worse. I have recently read in the media some statements from the New Zealand Property Council that tried to fix the housing, the price of housing in Auckland as the blame of the MUL or RUB, and that the MUL had never been moved for 20 years. I think colleagues who came from district councils or city councils will recall that's not true. With Botany and Flatbush, Hingaia, Takanini, Hobsonville, Long Bay, I understand Millwater. These things were in the rural areas, and after a lot of work and planning and infrastructure provision, they were put into the urban area, and that's the way it should be done. So there's one thing to disagree with an MUL or an RUB. It's another thing to spread misinformation around it. And I think as we are members of the New Zealand Property Council, I would hope that the council management would get onto the Property Council and say, look, if you're going to talk about our work, please keep it factual. Misinformation at this stage is not helpful. Coming down to the Waiheke Island situation, I have to say that's quite bizarre. Now, in moving the methods of the RUB from the regional policy statement to the district plan, and the consequences I referred to earlier, in some ways, it's a final kick in the head to regionalism. But leaving that aside, the panel in dealing with the rural-urban boundary on Waiheke says on page 15 of its report in terms of the RUB section, topics 016-017, rural-urban boundary, says the following. A small number of submitters requested changes to the rural-urban boundary on Waiheke Island. As noted, the panel recommends the rural-urban boundary be located in the district plan, and the district plan and the recommended plan does not cover Waiheke Island or the other Hauraki Gulf Islands. Within this context, the panel considers any changes to the rural-urban boundary on Waiheke Island are best left to a district plan review for the Hauraki Gulf Islands, at which time such possible changes can be considered in the wider context of other district plan issues. The panel, therefore, has not recommended changes to the rural-urban boundary on Waiheke Island. So according to the panel, the RUB stays in place on Waiheke Island. The policies and objectives stay in place in the regional policy statement. Only the methods move out of that. Now, to disappear as a consequence of the panel's unintended decision, I think is not helpful. It's not good planning. It's not good government. If there is an apparent lacuna in regard to Waiheke Island, it can be sorted out in one sentence. Clearly, the panel's intention was not that reckless. The panel's intention was to keep the rural-urban boundary on Waiheke Island, and as the rural-urban boundary is a policy, is a regional objective, is a regional policy, I think all you need is one sentence to clarify that if people have any doubt. The other point is that the district plan must be consistent with all statutory documents, and to have Waiheke Island an exception because of an apparent mistake, which is arguable. I'm sure the panel would say we haven't made a mistake. Staff seem to think they have made a mistake. It's the law of unintended consequences.